We're live. It's official. We are on YouTube. This is Graham Brown in the Asia Tech Podcast studio in Singapore, joined by two, very well-dressed gentlemen, very well-behaved at least. Well, if you're not watching on the video, you'll just have to describe the scene.
Don't let the suit fool you.
No, well, sitting to my right, you, sir. Introduce yourself.
William Gilchrist.
William, welcome.
Thank you. Really.
Yeah, we had a good chat as well off air, which talked about your odyssey coming to Asia. How many years have you been in Asia?
I did feel like Odysseus. This is true. This is very true. I've been in Asia for going on 14 years.
14 years.
But I've been in Asia in and out for the last 20 plus years.
And the amazing thing about your journey is you came to Asia. Was it right when you were 13 originally?
Yeah, when I was 13.
You did a year in China when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And you were a kid at 13.
I was a student ambassador for the US.
Right. But you weren't a kid at the end of it. Your life and your world changed.
It was kind of like, in biblical terms, when Moses went to the top and then came back and had gray hair and that beard.
The tablets.
I felt like I had the tablets and my beard was just gray at 13. Right. And I had a beard then. No, I didn't. But I feel like I grew one once I got back. And
a philosophical beard.
Absolutely.
Wow. It must have, that's a whole podcast in itself, being 13 years old in China, coming from, where was it you were at the time? Chicago,
yeah.
Yeah.
Born and raised.
So you wouldn't know anything really about
Very
China.
little. My mom's an artist, so we always traveled to like Europe and stuff like that for leisure, but that's just tourism. But living in China that young.
Insane.
It's a different game. Yeah.
That's great. Well, there's stories to tell. Hopefully some of that will come out tonight.
Oh, well, let me know.
I'll tee you up.
There's not much tech related to it, but...
No, it's all tech. Everything's tech these days, right? You can't escape the thing. All right, William, thanks a lot. Over there, Amit, good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise, Graham.
Haven't seen you for a while.
I know.
Random meetings in Singapore, as you do. It's a small city.
As you do, and you obviously have a very strong Kiwi connection.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I know you're getting to that point, is that you have a very interesting background, a bit like William as well, a bit multicultural. Yep. So you were born in the UK, grew up in the UK?
I grew up in the UK in my early parts.
Yeah, until what age?
To my teens.
Yeah.
And then went to private boarding school in India.
Yeah.
Spent most of my working life in New Zealand and then in Singapore. I've been in Singapore for 10 years now. You could tell I'm from New Zealand, right? Just my name, the way I look, and
Amit
the way
Gupta.
I talk. Yeah, I know. It's just...
that was the first thing I thought.
Yeah.
That
was the first thing I said.
You looked at my name and you go, we got a Kiwi guy on this.
I said, this is awesome.
Yeah. Are there many Guptas in New Zealand? Because that's such a common Indian name, isn't it?
There's probably about 500 million Guptas around. So
right.
I suspect
but
a
not
few
many
of
in
them
New
filtered
Zealand.
through to New Zealand.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because you've got a bit of a Singaporean lilt to your accent as well.
Well, I've been here for 10 years now.
Yeah.
Wow.
But when you think about yourself, this is an interesting conversation, and I don't mean it in a derogatory way, but about identity. And I think, same with myself. I was brought up in the UK, but I've lived all over. I've lived in Japan. I've lived in New Zealand.
Yeah.
Now in Singapore. I lived in Spain as well. And people ask me, where are you from? And naturally, you want to say I'm from the UK. But I'm not really. I don't consider, because people automatically think, you're British, therefore, you do this and this and this, right?
Yeah.
How about yourself?
Mate, it's so I had this. Someone asked me the other day, said, "So where are you from?" And it took me like a good 5 seconds to answer that. And this guy was like,
"Right,
you needed to think about that." I said, "Yeah, I do, because just."
There's not a straight answer.
We're all sort of blending now, right? It's just really hard to tell. And for me, home is where the heart is, and New Zealand just feels like home now. And I live here, so Singapore feels like home I'm living in. But New Zealand's where the heart is. So.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, it provides interesting perspectives, and hopefully those will come out tonight. Because I think what makes talking about Asia interesting, coming from a slightly an outsider's perspective, is the fact that you put it into context. You're not a Singaporean talking about how great Singapore is, which is fine. That has its place. But to put all that into context, like Asia, understanding what's changing and so on, having seen different worlds, makes sense of it, doesn't it? So maybe we can start. I want to talk a little bit about the stories we're going to introduce tonight and why we're talking about them. And I'm going to start with an easy story, and then we're going to sort of lead into Singapore, and then we're going to talk about the whole Silicon Valley, the US thing, and then over to you at the end. Not that you've got to wait to the end of it, but you've published an interesting article which I read through today on LinkedIn. So we'll end up with that. Let's talk about the top story, which I didn't share with you beforehand, both of you. So it's a bit of a surprise. There's this news that's come out about Grab and Uber recently. They've been fined. So maybe if we can whack this one up on the screen. So this is interesting. A $13 million fine to Grab and Uber because, according to the Competition Commission here in Singapore, that they dominate the marketplace. Now, I don't want to talk too much about, the mechanisms of the fine and stuff like that, but just the fact that they're so dominant here in Asia, Grab and Uber. We talked about Gojek last week. If you go to Indonesia, they're obviously the big player. And it's interesting that they're saying that if they can prove that somebody else can capture 30% of the market in Singapore, then they won't fine them. I think that's an impossibility. There's quite a few new ride-hailing apps starting up here in Singapore, aren't they? But have you ever used them? What do you do? Where do you sort of fall on the whole sort of taxi ride-sharing apps? What do you do?
Well, I kind of missed like the whole U.S. Lyft movement, right? So Lyft is sitting in the U.S. and I've been away for so long, I didn't even know what that was. But the opportunity for a company like Lyft, or I know there's one out of Seattle called Movin'.
Yeah. That's right.
If they were trying to go into Singapore, I think it'd be quite difficult because, one, they would need to go into up against a Grab, but then at the same time, you have ComfortDelGro, right?
Yeah.
And that mobile app is amazing now. I don't know if you've seen some of the new iterations they've done with that.
A lot of people swear by it, right?
Well,
but it's traditional. It's a normal taxi company, right?
Exactly, normal taxi company. But I went from when I first came to Singapore, there was no Grab, there was no Uber.
Right.
There was a talk of this company called Easy Taxi. Right?
That's right.
Remember Easy Taxi?
Yep.
And then it wasn't Grab, it was Grab Taxi, right? And it came later. And I remember just swearing by ComfortDelGro. I said, look, good old fashioned taxi. That's it. But the app was so challenging and calling in was so challenging that it really wasn't worth it. But I think because Uber came on the scene, Grab came on the scene, and their interfaces were so perfect and it was such a seamless process that whoever they've gotten to design the new ComfortDelGro application,
it wins.
I feel like I'm plugging ComfortDelGro.
Yeah, well, what is it about?
Shout out to ComfortDelGro.
I haven't used this app, so
well, even the experience. You get fixed fares now on it, right? And sometimes it's less than Grab, right? Here's the thing, right? That I struggle with. First of all, I think you don't realize how much you can miss a thing till it's gone from your life, and that's Uber for me, right? Uber, the customer experience, the ability to deal with, resolving issues and stuff was just outstanding, right? We didn't appreciate it then, but now what I experienced with Grab, the whole concept of Grabs and these ride-hailing apps, it's all meant to be sort of creating more efficiencies in the market and get better customer experience, get better pricing for consumers. But I've actually found now, Grab sometimes has ridiculous pricing. The other day I had to go somewhere. ComfortDelGro cost me $18 and Grab's fare was $40.
Right. That was in the morning when it was raining.
It was in the evening.
Oh.
And I had to get to an event. And it kind of went, well, that's...
There you go. Where's the innovation in that?
Well,
right?
It defeats the purpose. And I hope that... I hope it's just a phase that they're working through it, because obviously there are probably some drivers that have dropped off and, maybe there's lesser supply now, and I'm hoping Grab's going to fix it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but Grab definitely brought a lot of things to the table. Now, granted, when it was Grab Taxi, I was not a fan, right? When it turned into Grab and they were bringing in some of these new components, right? Because I think it was Grab that brought in the taxi link to the application, right? Because with Uber, it was just a car, and it was originally it came in, it's like the Uber Black, right? So like you're showing up in a Mercedes Benz or like something really expensive, so it's like a $40 trip minimum, right? And then Grab comes on the scene. They say, okay, no, but actually you can get a ComfortDelGro or like a Silver Taxi or like a Transcab. So what they kind of coming in from that angle, almost that like real working person's reality. Right.
Yeah.
That sparked Uber to come up with Uber X and then there was Grab Hitch.
Yeah.
Then suddenly there's Uber Share,
that's
Uber Pool, right?
Right.
So on one end, I do miss Uber in a big way, but I thought that was such a fun time for those like 2 to 3 years where you would see Grab come out with something and the Uber's like, oh, okay, all right, well, we got to do something now.
Yeah.
Right? Let's
Well,
do the
that's
same
true.
thing.
I mean, Crab's been a great innovation story, right?
Right.
I think they're a great company. They've done a lot for this economy, not just in Singapore, but across ASEAN, right?
Mm.
But and I think Grab was what made Uber operate in a manner that benefited all of us as well.
Yeah.
I mean, they kept the market balanced. I mean, there's a reason why Uber was always giving out, those $5 discounts.
Yeah, almost
per
free,
ride.
right?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
whole. I've
Yeah.
actually done a ride with Uber that cost me like 10 cents.
There you go. Yeah, amazing. Okay, good. Well, easy one to get us talking
Yeah.
tonight, because I want to bring it onto the subject of innovation, right? And we are here in Singapore, so it's a good place as any to start. Singapore, a global hub for innovation. Whose story was that? Was that yours, Amit?
Yeah.
All right, so talk about this. This is a story in Forbes.
Yes.
You can sort of talk us through this. Why? I mean, what's it telling us in this story?
Well, it's quite interesting, Graham. When you started off, and when we started off this session, and you talked about Singaporeans talking about Singapore, and when have folks like us who've come from overseas and made Singapore our home, I can't not appreciate what Singapore brings to the fray, not just in our personal lives, but also from a professional standpoint. I mean, it is such an easy place to start a company. I mean, when did you and I meet each other at the Fullerton?
2 months, 3 months.
And you were getting this set up, and look at you now, right? I mean, I think there's just so much going on for Singapore, and I felt compelled when I saw the article from William around the Silicon Valley thing, and I thought, well, actually, Singapore stands to gain a lot from that. Not to say that anything's going away from the Silicon Valley. It's just everything reaches a saturation point. It's a lot going on there, and the market's growth has shifted to Asia. I mean, Asia, as per the World Bank, by 2020 is going to account for 45% of global economic growth. I mean, that's huge, right? And Singapore sits right in the middle. And I just think it's such a great place to live. It's so easy to get things done. I walk to work. I don't live next to my office, but I walk to work, right? And it's great.
Yeah. What's the secret of the success?
Look, we decided to stay clear of politics.
Yeah,
but I do think the government's had a big role to play in it. I think the government knows when to step in from a governance standpoint and a regulation standpoint, and also knows when to step in from a corporate and business growth standpoint. I think the people driving some of these things, I think, are very realistic in what they're trying to achieve. I think it's a very metric-driven environment, and I think there's a lot more support than just talk.
Is it? I mean, I'm curious to hear both of your perspectives. I mean, you spent a lot of time in China. It's a different type of entrepreneurialism there, isn't it? It's that here, I see a lot of older entrepreneurs. Often, I mean, I count myself. I'm an old guy on the wrong side of 45, right? So you've got a group of entrepreneurs who have experience. These are people who've done 10, 20 years in a corporate, understand what's broken, stepped out of that. It might be in HR or legal tech or fintech, and they want to change it. And they have relationships. They know how to speak the language of that vertical sector, and they know what they need to change, and they can go out and raise funds. So there's that. Whereas in China, there's a hunger, isn't there? It's a different kind. So what do you see here in Singapore? What do you think's working?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, the business that we're in, we are actually on-demand sales teams for SMEs and startups and also some MNCs as well. So we do go-to-market strategies, pretty much taking Singapore-based technologies and bringing them global, then also bringing Western technologies and bringing them here. So from a sales perspective, right, or a sustainable revenue generation perspective. I would say that in the 10 or so years that I've been in Singapore in the technology space, being a salesperson, being an outbound salesperson, there's a lot of innovation here in terms of product creation and development. There are a lot of marketers. There are very few people out there that are on one end taking products and going global with them out of Singapore, selling it. I mean, how many Singapore technologies are solid in Arkansas right now? Not that that's even important, but the reality is there are companies sitting in Dallas that have clear offices here, that are being sold here, that are actually getting traction here, or from other places. But how often are the Singapore technologies using the same level of fire to go outward? And that just goes, I mean, across the board. I mean, if you look at what Razer, right? Razer rebranded itself almost like a California company,
Right.
but it's really built in Chai Chi, way out in Badok. But it's almost like you need that validation almost to get this global push, where I feel like Singapore needs to do a little bit more, not just on the marketing end, but also from kind of just a sales focus or a sales function thing, component to push their technologies to the global sphere and not just locally. There's a very conservative view on how products are here. You have a technology, you want to try to capture the Singapore market, and then maybe next year we'll go to Southeast Asia broader, right? Where you have other countries like China that'll say, okay, well, look, we'll go global in the first 6 months. We're just going to give it a go, right? Far more aggressive. And I think that that may in some way be holding the ability for some of these companies in Singapore to scale back a little bit, just from a mentality standpoint. And I'm just speaking from personal sales.
Absolutely. I love you brought up Razer as an example. I mean, making phenomenally, well-designed mice, and keyboards, and in a market which you thought the margins are minimal. My son is a huge fan of Razer. I mean, he's 12 years old.
The gamer.
He's a gamer, exactly. He loves it, and the things glow, and he takes me to the store, and it shows me how expensive these things are. And I asked him, I said, "Where are these guys from?" He says, "California." There you go.
See.
And who would know? And they were just down the road, right?
Just down the road. But isn't that really sad?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I sort of relate to that. So I think what you said is very true. And if I put on my New Zealand hat, right? It's part of the issue is when you don't have a large domestic market for consumption of whatever you're making, it's very hard to scale up, right? I mean, if you look at the US, you look at China, by the time you're ready to go overseas, you've already got enough scale behind you to make that push. Like in New Zealand, most companies from New Zealand, I used to say, in my time working with the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise or the government, my view was don't encourage companies from looking beyond Australia, right? Because they'd go across the ditch, and by the time they were in there, they'd spend a few years there, they get burnt out, and then they come back because it's a small market. In Singapore as well, a lot of Singapore companies tend to focus on Singapore, and that we've got to remember it's a really small market. Even from an IT perspective, the consumption within Singapore is small. What you've got to tap into is the potential working with the big multinationals that are headquartered in Singapore for Asia Pacific, because they make a lot of decisions out of Singapore for investments in other markets. So I think leverage that and you'd be all right. And I think since we're going to talk about the Silicon Valley story, right? I actually think my view and my recommendation advice to any Singapore startup, and we're implementing that ourselves, is start in Singapore. It's a great place. It gives you the room and space to try a thing and get it all up and running. It's expensive, but it's still, you get the talent, you got the infrastructure and everything, and then go to the US and work your way backwards, because it does help. I mean, I would say that. I mean, don't go Singapore and then try and go into Indonesia and Malaysia, because those markets are not mature enough, right? It's going to, by the time you start setting up, because you're not going to get scale in those markets, you might actually burn through all your cash. So if you're going to burn through cash, might as well do it in a market that's actually going to help you scale up, and then work your way backwards from the US.
Interesting. So people would naturally say geographically, it's the concentric circles coming out of Singapore, isn't it? Like Singapore, then Indonesia, Malaysia, then Thailand and Philippines maybe, and so on. But it makes no sense in this day and age to do it that way. I mean, if you can
absolutely
go to the US, go to the US.
Singapore's a mature market, it's mature, and take your learnings here. If you've got the investments, if you can make that push, go to the US. It's what William was saying, right? Because when you get access to a very big market, and then work your way backwards and market yourself as a sales organization from the US, and start building it out.
Okay, let's talk about that, because let's bring in the Silicon Valley. We've got to talk about the Silicon Valley story, because we've been teeing it up. Now, this is an interesting story in TechCrunch, which you flagged up, William. The title of which is Bay Area VCs agree that Silicon Valley may be losing its gravitational pull after all. Finally. What's going on?
Well, I mean, this just kind of speaks to an overarching narrative that I'm actually writing a big piece in a publication pretty soon on this. But so a little bit of an exclusive on the topic, which is the idea of buzzwords, how much I hate the word buzzword. Or things like when people say this is, oddly enough, disrupt.
Right.
This is disrupting the market. Or, have you really made it in Silicon Valley? Yeah. I really despise that because I think that's killing innovation. It's killing the creativity. It's killing that frontiersman idea, which is what technology is supposed to be, right? You don't have to be in Silicon Valley to be an amazing innovation beacon, right? But there is this thing about getting this validation from an area like that. So when I saw this article, I thought that it was perfect. It was kind of in line with my narrative where look at how this is naturally happening, where people now are drawing a circle around Silicon Valley in a 300-mile radius.
Yeah.
And they're trying to find cheaper places to live because now the beacon of innovation or the fighter of the little guy entrepreneur is now too expensive to live in. So why not, be innovative? And the real innovation is go outside of Silicon Valley. Don't use the buzzword of it anymore. Don't use that label to validate yourself. If you're a good company, you're a good product, you have good strategies, then you don't need that label. So I found that article to be a lot of fun to talk about, particularly since Singapore is trying to position itself as a beacon in Asia, and it totally can, because look, Silicon Valley isn't even Silicon Valley anymore. So this could totally be that environment as well with the right behaviors. So it's a really interesting piece. So I kind of looked at it from a different angle than just literally what's there.
I wonder, is it just an economic factor that people are moving out of Silicon Valley? Because what do you have to pay to rent a flat, an apartment in San Francisco now? Because you're competing with the Google boys and the Facebook buses, right?
My alma mater.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I heard stories of people like driving from Bend, which is in Oregon or something. It's like a 10-hour drive. Who, and they would commute. I mean, obviously they're not doing it every day, but they would commute to the Facebook offices or the Google offices. And obviously they drive back at the weekend. But that's the only way they could make it economically affordable for them, right? And lifestyle-wise, it's not great either. So.
But that's if you're working for a big MNC. But if you're an entrepreneur, right, or you're a small startup, what's the difference between being in Bend and doing that same commute, or being in Wyoming and there's not commuting at all, but having a really good internet connection, a great product, a great marketing team, a great sales team, maybe an outsourced sales team, and doing your strategy from there? It doesn't really matter where you are these days. I mean, that's the whole point of technology, right? You don't need to be physically there. You could actually still achieve some of the same success, even if you're in the surrounding areas.
Well, just to add to that, I think it's not just the cost element of being in Silicon Valley. I think everything runs its course, and I'm not saying Silicon Valley's not, it still is. It's still the mecca for innovation. I really do. I think it'd be silly to undermine that. But I think a lot of the actions shifted eastwards, right? I mean, if you look at emerging technologies, for example, right? I was at the IoT World conference last week, and there was a presentation there, and they highlighted, IoT connections, and they looked at China, right? And I think it was China Mobile. They added some ridiculous number, like 140 million in the last 6 months. The next highest number of IoT connections outside of China was with Vodafone, and I think that was something like 75 million. So you look at what's going on. You look at just this uptake in consumption in some of these markets. You look at if you look at China, right? I mean, China is probably the only country, putting aside all these trade wars and everything, if you look at from a capability standpoint, they're the only country today that actually has the ability to play in the entire digital value chain, right? They can make the chip all the way up to the application and take it to market, right? I mean, you look at what some of the Chinese companies are doing. It's not that different. I mean, you look at what's going on in India, you look at what's going on in in Australia. So there's just so much going on now outside. There was a time when all of this happened in the US. It started there, it would get consumed there. Now the difference is it's starting here, and it's also, a lot of it's also getting consumed here. I think where Singapore companies can do better is, to your point, I think they need that go-to-market and sales support to help them really, you've got to reach much broader than what we're trying to do in Singapore. I think we really need to scale up, because the one thing that holds back our innovation, I think Bloomberg rated Singapore, I think, the third most innovative city in the world, right? And there's a whole bunch of other stats out there. But I think the one thing that holds us back, we've got the infrastructure, we've got access to capital, we've got great education, we've got talent, we've got all of that. What we haven't got is successful exits for startups.
Yeah, examples.
That's what you get that's what you get in Silicon Valley. And you're not going to get successful exits unless you can demonstrate global scale. That's why I think a lot of companies from Singapore need to focus on thinking bigger, think global. If you can't, then it's going to limit your ability to exit. And if you don't see enough exits in Singapore, that's where you don't see the outputs from all this innovation. You got to see that, and I think Silicon Valley does such a good job of that.
Yeah, but that's also where the challenge is as well in Singapore. So there is plenty of talent in Singapore. There isn't much investment in developing sales talent in Singapore, and that's the challenge. People see sales as a bad word. When I say, hi, my name is Will, I'm actually a sales guy. I run a sales organization. We're sales mercenaries for tech companies. The looks that I get, and I do it on purpose because I know how people view sales, but that also, that look that I get and that we get is the exact reason why those exits are so challenging, because not enough people are applying for sales roles. They want to be an account manager. They want to be a marketer. They want to be an inbound salesperson where they can just take the inbound inquiries, right?
Yeah.
But how many people want to sign up to take a sales target where they need to go out and source leads and close business and really take on not many people
How is
in
it
the
in
market?
China by comparison? How do you think there's kids there who are signing up to be field sales guys?
I would say that locally, if you were to look at inside of China, for sure. When you look at on a global scale, China struggles as well. I think that if you look at the brands in China, I mean, they're good. I mean, I was just in Harare, Zimbabwe a few months ago, and one of the tallest towers there they had a Huawei logo on it. And I said, okay, well, that's cool. But, I do know that it wasn't a sales or business development or go-to-market team that did that. So I feel like across the region in general, there are some challenges for sales talent on a global scale in terms of doing go-to-market into the West and go-to-market into the Middle East and things like that from here. Like, how many of these brands are really being sold? And I'm not talking about the big brands, but I'm talking about the medium and the lower brands from Singapore, from China, from Thailand, even from Vietnam, some of the developments coming out of there. How many of these technologies really being pushed, and who's pushing them? Because there's not enough people in region willing to take it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think it's, if you look at really mature markets like the US and Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Europe, I mean, sales is not looked down upon. I mean, people take pride in it. If they're good at it, they do it really well. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all salespeople.
Absolutely.
I mean, everything we're doing in our lives is selling, right? I mean, we're hustling, whether it's, finding a partner, whether it's making friends, whether it's getting a job done. It's all about selling at some point, just different transactions, right? But, I mean, if you look at, I guess where we are here in Singapore, I think we need to change that. And we need to focus more on people taking pride in what they're doing and not be shy about selling. I mean, you see a lot of technology vendors. I mean, I talk to a lot of them all the time. I talk to a lot of technology buyers. I talk to a lot of technology vendors. And you talk to technology vendors, and some of them have apprehensions in reaching out to CIOs or CMOs and stuff. And they're like, well, they don't want to talk to a sales guy. And I said, that's not true. Because a CIO or a CMO, I mean, they're all trying to get the best options and partners out there, and they are looking to talk to you. They do want to talk to you. I mean, a CIO once said to me, he said, I spend, at least 15 to 20% of my time, my entire week, talking to salespeople and from vendors. And it's not because I have to, it's because I need to. That's how I learn from them. I need to evaluate what all's out there in the market and what I should be looking at. And then you filter through. So I think those are both very important functions. And people need to realize that, you got to sell and your customer will respect that.
And, a salesperson lives their life in rejection, and that's the best feedback, right?
Well, maybe that's probably why we're getting to why the Asians aren't so strong on that, right?
I didn't even want to touch that point, but I can. I can totally get into it.
Absolutely.
I can totally get into that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, being a Yank, forgive me for using the phrase, but I am a Yank. We are definitely faceless, right? We can definitely take embarrassment.
But what is that? Where does that come from? I mean, this is really interesting subject because it's like, where does that start? It's
childhood
not something.
Education.
Yeah. What were you taught at school, which made? I mean, that translate. You've got great storytellers like Steve Jobs on the stage, who are one of the best salespeople out there. Yeah. I mean, what have they learned at school that we're not sort of? It's sort of. What is the difference between that American company and that Chinese brand that is faceless, right?
Okay. Well, it's really simple. You start in kindergarten in America, right? Every morning you have to stand up and do a pledge of allegiance to the flag with your class, right? You have to do reports where you need to stand in front of the entire class, your peers, at least once a week and talk about a book report or a movie, or if you color something in a coloring book, you are forced to stand in front of your class and say, I colored this and this is what I tried to do, and I put the color. It doesn't matter what you're saying. The fact that you're saying it in front of your classmates is what they're trying to teach you. So, I mean, I probably have done thousands of public speaking engagements before the age of 10.
Right.
Just being in school. So that's number one. Two, also, free choice. I taught in public school in Shanghai for a while. And when I was teaching public school, what was fascinating to see was the fact that they had assigned stickers on the chairs for my students, that each student had to go and sit in this one chair. And every day they were doing the same thing. So every morning they'd walk in and they'd sit in the same chair. And I like to mess stuff up. I mean, that's just what I do. I mean, we especially being a sales guy, it's just like, we got to do something different here, right? Yeah. And I said, okay, look, guys, how about this? You today don't sit in that sticker chair. I know it has your name on it. I know it has your name and it's your color on the chair. I know it's your name. Go sit in that person's chair. The battle that I had with these kids, because but this is my chair with my name on it though. That's not
it's been assigned.
It's not the process.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, forget the process.
Yeah.
Just sit in another chair.
You wonder how that sort of transforms into later stage when they're...
Yeah. It totally does, right? Where in the States, that would be normal. It's like, well, you know what, guys? We're just going to shift it up today. Switch your chairs. Or, hey, look, we're going to take class outside.
Yeah, that's a pivot, right?
Yeah, let's just pivot it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, you can... Yeah, it's a difference in being compliant and being conformist, right?
Yeah.
Well, to your question, I mean, I was just thinking while you were chatting and where, for me, I actually, obviously it's all in your upbringing and stuff. Also, but, I got into, my first startup was when I was 23, built an ERP company. And, when I was really young, my brother is about 3 years older than me. And I learned it from him. He said, never take anything personally. He said, in business, it's never personal. And I say that to myself. I say that to my team. Don't ever take it personally. If people said no, it's because they don't need it or it doesn't meet their need, whatever, right? And I mean, anyone in the market who's dealt with me, I mean, I'm technically not a sales guy, but I'm a sales guy. It's my job to make sure a business makes money, right? And we have a sales team, but I still go out there and meet customers, and people who deal with me, they know that I will want their money, but I will do it first and foremost. Before I think about taking their money, I'll think about what the value I can give them. And then I look at 3 boxes, right? And I've always said this to all my sales teams. I've said, look at 3 things. The first is the customer has a need. Don't push something if they don't have a need. They have a need, or you make them aware of a need, right? Second, you've got to be able to fulfill that need. You have the capability to fulfill it. Third, they actually have the money, right? If they tick all those 3 boxes, then if you can't close that deal, then I'll come after you and ask you why you can't do it, right? So qualify it, but don't be hesitant. If you don't ask for it, you don't get it.
But you've I mean, like both of you've taken pride in sales.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting, it's a cultural thing as well, isn't it? Because I mean, when you grow up, you learn the stories, don't you? I mean, whether it's the lemonade stands or you learn the stories about the greatest salesman and all those kind of books that are out there. It's part of our sort of narrative, isn't it? Yeah. There seems to be that missing here, which is I suppose when I know Jack Ma is probably the most high-profile entrepreneur out there in Asia, and he is a salesman and a very good communicator as well. That maybe when he gets onto the stage and he will then sort of create a pathway for people to follow. You know, it's the sticker thing, isn't it? Oh, look, I've got a sticker now. I can do this.
Yep.
That there will be stories out there of people who say, okay, actually selling's all right. It's actually a noble profession here in Asia.
Well, I've got to tell you this. I mean, just one story and anecdote. Before I moved to Singapore, I worked for a multinational. I worked for them. I ran the New Zealand operation, moved up in my regional leadership role in Singapore for Asia Pacific. And when I was in New Zealand, we had our financial year end in September, right? And there were customers I would call, and these were MDs of big tech companies. In those days, you had EDS and all around as well. There was EDS and there was a whole bunch of other ones, HP, Microsoft. And I would call these guys around in September for a coffee. And, you know, most of them knew why I was calling. And they'd be like, oh, it's that time of year, is it? End of financial year? I'd be like, yeah, it is. And I'd be very upfront. You know what? This is the one time you can twist my arm and close it, you know, cut a deal with me. And you know, they would appreciate it. And almost became like a ritual every year. And we found it entertaining. And we knew what we were going to close. And it was great. It was a lot of fun. You enjoy it.
No shame.
No.
That's what's cool about it.
Yeah.
I like those stories.
And you know, it's I run a sales training course with Gradient, which is a local team here. And one of the examples that we use, and it's very similar to what you're talking about with the business need. I'm all about that style of selling, solution selling, and people. That's a buzzword again, solution selling.
Didn't say social selling.
But I usually use this example, right? Which is there's a lot of product selling. This is also probably the reason why sales isn't very trusted in the region, because there's a lot of product selling. There's a lot of product dumping and
product pushing,
right? Yeah. But what it is and I use this example, right? So let's say if you walked into a doctor's office, right? Now you trust a doctor, right? You trust someone who has a degree on their wall to inject fluids into your arm that you don't know what they are. You have no idea what their GPA was in med school, but you trust them with your life, right? Yeah. Because they took the Hippocratic Oath, right? And the reason why you trust a doctor is because, one, they're certified in what they do and how they carry themselves. But what if you walked into a doctor's office and before you said anything, that doctor said, look, I have Valium, I have morphine, I have this, and this, right? Well, that's not a doctor. That's a drug dealer.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of that in tech where it's a lot of pushing
I got
product,
all these
right?
cards. Which one do you want?
Yeah, exactly. But the reason why you trust a doctor is, what does a doctor do? It sits down and the doctor says, okay, so what's going on? Okay, so you have a fever? Well, how long has that been an issue? Okay, well, do you have any other symptoms? Like, do you have a rash? Okay, and then the doctor sits back and writes something down and says, I think you may have this based on all the pains and all the issues that you've currently presented to me. That's why we trust a doctor with our life. But a salesperson can do the exact same thing and gain that trust, like you said, when you can call people and just openly have that conversation, because you've established that, look, I'm only going to give you something that's relevant to you.
Yeah.
But in the market here, particularly in Asia, there's so much product dumping that it's spoiled the market to where people view salespeople as, okay, well, look, I don't have any money right now.
Yeah.
You know, that's been the issue that's been going on.
Yeah.
Awesome. You sales guys are getting warmed up now. I know you could probably go on for another hour, but I just want to, I'm conscious of the time and it's been fascinating. I want to drop one last story. We haven't talked about this one, so maybe if we can just kind of whack this one up on the internets.
Yep.
If I can share the link with you. Did you get that one? Not that one there, not this one here. Oh, we're going to do that one. We'll do this one now. We'll jump into this one. Okay. And then I'll do my last piece, but I'll give you the microphone now, Amit.
Oh.
You wrote this interesting article, a little bit controversial, no?
Yeah.
Are we doing controversy today? But
Yeah.
I mean, I noticed you saw Charles Reed Anderson's presentation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had him on the show. He's a pretty awesome dude.
Yeah, he is. And look, we work very closely together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's do it then. Tell us about forecasting. What's wrong with it?
Well, this might be worse than the political situation for me.
Okay.
This
is the politics. Of
this is the politics in my life.
Yeah.
No, look, there's nothing about a right or wrong, or good or bad. I think from my standpoint, what all I was trying to say is, when if forecasting is always difficult, right? And especially when you're looking at forecasting around new emerging technologies and new areas, because you've got no historical trends. Typically, you model forecasts based on historical performance and trends, right? That's got to be a baseline, and you build on that. my only point was focus more on the real stuff, and the real stuff is understanding the customer's needs, the appetite, what their priorities are, and do they have the propensity to consume these services, and are they looking at the right use cases, and how much investment is going to go into that. Make it real. Don't make it about a hypothetical number that we can all throw out there, because the example I gave there was when I saw Charles's presentation, he'd probably love to hear this, and I will make him listen to this later on. But when I saw his slide and I saw $7 trillion to a $1 trillion adjustment. I mean, and this can happen. It's not the first time it's happened. Yeah. And for the IoT market, I mean, that is a huge drop. Now, if you were building your investment plans on that, then you've got to recalibrate. And so all my point was, our entire belief system is we are focused on building a research platform that allows the market to come and consume it. It's for the market, by the market. Come and consume it, make it real, leverage off the experience of your peers. And the couple of words I learned most recently, the wisdom of crowds.
Oh yeah. James Sirowicki.
Yeah, and
awesome.
And that's just leverage off that.
Here's an interesting thing. My previous business was in telecoms and research.
I know that. Yeah.
Okay, so I was one of the guys that they used to pay money to come up with a number.
Yeah,
and I would confess that most of the time it's like I don't know what the methodology was for that. It was my methodology for getting the number was what did the other guy say?
Yeah.
So I went back and looked at that and thought, whoa, that's a little bit aggressive. I might do a little bit less.
Yeah.
But I think generally that's how the telecoms industry worked back then. And I don't think we've evolved a lot since then, have we?
Well, no, because the problem is it all comes from a supply side view, right? And supply side view, it's the only one time the sales guys step in and they're very bullish, and everyone wants more investments, and to get more investment, they all want to say this is going to do, this market's going to grow, and that brings them investments. And when you sort of have a cumulative effect, and then you suddenly got hype.
Yeah. It is one of the problems as well, is that a lot of the reasons why people use those forecasts is to sell, in the sense that actually, I'll buy this report because it's got the bigger number than this report, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, if this guy's saying 7 trillion and I'm doing 1% of the market, that's a lot better than this guy. It's 1 trillion, 1%, right? So
yeah, and it's also a bit of validation, right? It makes it much easier to put a business case in place when you say, well, such and such firm says this is going to be a huge opportunity, and hence I want to invest in this. Or the market has dropped, and that's why. I mean, there are situations where companies don't meet their numbers, and then they want to look at how the market's performed, and they go, market hasn't performed very well, and hence we haven't performed. So some of it becomes this whole sort of support validation mechanism.
Have you seen any forecasts that have scared you recently about Asia in the future? What's been out there that you thought, oh my God?
Well, it scared me retrospectively when I saw that. I actually wrote that article. I have to confess. And my team might kill me for this, but I have to confess, I wrote that article within 15 minutes of Charles' presentation.
Well,
15 minutes, I banged it out.
That was a good job.
Right? And I was like, the analyst in me came out, and I just wrote it. And I wrote it because it bothered me, and I wrote it. And then I sat on it for 24 hours because I just thought about, I'm not here to quote, controversy. I mean, we're here to run our business, and that's what we get on with. And then I just said to my team, I said, you know what? I feel compelled to share my view, and I can't hold myself back. If I hold myself back, then I know it will bother me. So I have to share it. And so that forecast retrospectively scared me. And I just thought, and it's not just that. There's a whole bunch of them. And we just need to be more real with emerging tech stuff, because we don't know how it's performed in the past. It's a lot easier when you're tracking servers, PCs, mobile devices, because you've seen how it's performed. So you can say, all right, based on the past performance and based on the data we have today, this is how the future is going to be. But if you're looking at a technology that we don't know, what's happened in the past, then we have to look at it today and tomorrow, and focus more on what it is the demand is, and where's what are customers looking for, and what are they trying to achieve, and focus on that. Because otherwise these forecasts just become a hypothetical number.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think we should look at how difficult it is to really give a forecast, right?
It's very hard.
When you're in a position where you're looking to either get investment or you're looking to show some kind of returns, the last thing you want to say in that boardroom is, okay, well, I don't really know. right? That's like the last thing you ever want to say. You don't want to use that phrase, I don't know, or we may not know something.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to get away from I don't know is to get that false sense of security by saying, hey, well, you know what? Well, based on what we saw last year, I think this is going to work.
Yeah.
I think that's the only reason why it's in the equation is because there is a lack of upfront ownership to what could go wrong in those conversations. And that is why sometimes you get, I mean, we get it a lot in the, like when I'm dealing with a lot of VCs, doing a lot of investment in some of these startups, and you look at some of their decks and you're like, okay, well, you just don't want to admit that you don't know how this is going to go. Yeah. And that's a scary thing to say, but we need to embrace that a little bit more. And I think you'll get less of the embellishment.
I absolutely agree. And look, I have to say this. I mean, I've been in big firms. I know how much effort goes into it. So we can't undermine the amount of effort an analyst puts into coming up with these forecasts. It's really hard. And they can get quite subjective because you're taking inputs across a whole bunch of subjective parameters. So it is really hard. And you know, at no point would you want to hammer them for getting the forecast wrong because, you know, they're not magicians. They have to work on something. The point is not that they do it wrong. The point is the businesses, when you're trying to scale up in emerging tech, then focus on the customer side, the demand side, rather than these numbers. I think these numbers are good. You need some version of the truth, and that's what forecasts really are. Right? And I would say some of the forecasts, like, you know, are really. It's a question of, it's probably the best option available today, right?
It's a starting point, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of rigor that goes into these things, and I'm sure, but it's just, you can't be a magician, and it's so. Forecasts are important. Put your business plans, but when you're really putting your money out there, then also look at other elements, which is the demand.
Absolutely. We'll put the details in the show notes if you want to go and read Amit's article, which I think is very good. And if you want to comment and flame him, if you want to comment. But I think it was a good job. And if you knocked that out 15 minutes after that presentation, then well done you. That was inspired, I think. So, I mean, we're talking about numbers. Let's just finish up with an interesting number. There's this chart which was produced this week. Now, this was submitted to us by a listener. So thanks a lot to Ken Lee, who submitted this. And he asks, this chart was produced, and we've only got a few minutes left, but I just want to get your thoughts on this. So his question was, looking at this chart, which was titled, "This Fascinating World Map was drawn based on country populations rather than, you know, political map as we know it, or a geographical map." And he asks, what does this map say about growth in middle-class consumers and entrepreneurial opportunities in the next 10 years? He's asking the panel here. So if we have a look at that map first, I mean, if we scroll to the top, Barrett, if we may. Yeah. So here we have a map of the world, which quite obviously shows how dominant India and China are. And, you know, certain countries like the UK and the New Zealand even are just specks in the grand scheme of things. And the US is quite small compared to India and China. What does it mean? To answer his question, what does it mean in terms of middle-class consumers and entrepreneurial opportunities in 10 years?
Look, I think it's consumption, right? And consumption drives scale for companies. I mean, if you look at what's going on in places like China and India, I mean, China is just on a different planet in terms of their business performance and the kind of innovation they're driving. You look at India, I mean, there's a lot of innovation, but there's lots of... India has a true sort of entrepreneurial spirit to it, and you see a lot of that going on. And you look at companies like Flipkart, you know, which have competed very effectively with Amazon, and you know, you look at where they are today with the Walmart acquisition. I mean, they're there because they were able to scale up based on the consumption, and that was driven by this cartogram. I mean, I loved it. I mean, this map that you shared yesterday. What I did love the most about it, I'm going to sidetrack a little bit. Do our users get to see it?
We got it up on the we can flip it back up again.
Yeah, could we just go to the South Pacific?
Right.
What I loved
Shout
about
out to the islands.
Yeah, what I loved about it,
the bottom right part.
Yeah, the bottom right part.
Yeah, I'll get the link and flip it back up so you can see. Oh, you got it again.
Yeah. Okay. So what I loved about it, and maybe I'm just being a bit.
Where's the South Pacific?
I hope I haven't lost my moment there, but
no.
You know,
talk us through. Here we go. It's the live demo, isn't it? When you go to the conference,
that's right.
Live demo. Well, it worked when you're in the lab. If you scroll to the top, Barrett, go to the top one, and then.
It works really well when when you've spent money as a customer, it works really well. So if you look at that, what I loved about it,
click on the map.
if you look at that bottom right corner, and you look at it, is I actually think that sums up, that equalizes New Zealand and Australia. I think that's how it should be.
What's that? Oceania, total 41 million people.
You look at the size of Australia there compared to New Zealand now. Well, New Zealand now looks a lot bigger than it is compared to Australia. That made my day. And
finally,
I was like,
some vindication for
we finally on the map. The number of times I've seen.
It means a lot to me. It's like Canadian.
It is.
It's Canadian.
I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to learn what that is.
Yeah.
Did you watch this? Did you watch this video with Jacinda Ardern, our Prime Minister, and about New Zealand dropping off the world maps? And there's actually a whole video around that. There's a whole campaign to get New Zealand back on the map. I mean, really, my office had a map that didn't have New Zealand on it.
Ouch. That's just terrible.
It's not there.
Well, look, in terms of this map, right, I found it fascinating for a few reasons. Can you pull up just the same one just so I can take a look at it? Look, it's all behavioral. We can zoom out a bit.
Yeah.
So we're looking at India, we're looking at China, we're looking at Japan, right? We're looking at Pakistan. I mean, we can look at these numbers in terms of population and think that these countries all operate the same. They don't. They don't develop technology the same. They don't have the same strategies in terms of how they take on the world with their technologies. They don't have the same rule sets when it comes to entrepreneurship. If you're an expat going into India and China trying to start a business versus if you're local, what type of technologies, service-based technologies or like back-end stuff. You have Japan, which 30% of their population is over the age of 65 by 2050. I mean, there's a lot that map isn't saying, right? Yeah. Where when you're looking at what does it mean in terms of the consumer, what type of consumer, from where, there's so many variables there that just aren't being told. We can't look at 1.3 billion and that be the same as 1.3 billion in China versus India. Like those are two different planets. Completely.
Yeah, so we can't look at just the top level numbers. We have to go to the
look at the demographics.
It's behavioral. Absolutely. I mean, Ethiopia, I think, was on there as like the second largest population in Africa. There's barely broadband connection. I'm half Ethiopian, by the way.
Right.
So like I'm like saying like, well, what is that telling us? That's not saying anything, right? Ethiopia 107 million.
I would like to see a map with just like middle class consumers, for example. That would be really interesting.
Yeah. That's something that we could look at and go on.
Because I mean, the numbers are now that they say by 2030, 2/3 of the world's middle class will live in Asia. You think about that, 2/3 in Asia. I mean, that is just, that's the gravitational pull, isn't it? Now that's the tipping point, really, isn't it? What will that mean? I mean, if we look at it from, let's say we saw that map in that context, what would that mean for entrepreneurs? 10 years. It is 10 years.
It all depends on the channels, right? It all depends on, I would say for entrepreneurs in Singapore, amazing, right? Yeah. If you're from outside of Asia and you move to Singapore and you start a business, great. If you're from outside of Asia and you move to Shanghai, good luck. If you've never been to Asia before and you go into India, good luck, right? Yeah. It just all depends, right? But if you're from, let's say, China and you start a business here, different, right? Yeah. Or if you're starting a business in China, there's also some challenges there. So there's so many angles that it's so tough to look at any of even the rising middle class.
I think the point around looking at behavior and demographics and I think that's really key as well. I mean, I like the map, but there's a lot of other layers that you got to look at. I mean, if you look at markets like India, China, and one of the fastest growing markets up to 2025 is Vietnam, right? If you look at these markets, I mean, they've got huge consumption. It's a great place if you've got a consumer-based tech business. You've got great opportunity to scale up if you do a good job. But the maturity of businesses still isn't there, right? I mean, you're still better off getting, enterprise, B2B opportunities, whether it's SMB, mid-market, or enterprise in markets like, Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan. I mean, Japan, Korea have their own nuances, but these are mature markets, and consumption of those sort of technologies is much higher. But if you're playing in markets like China, India, if you look at all the companies that are coming out of there, their scales come from predominantly through consumer consumption, right? And with the exception of, say, the telcos. I mean, if you look at Lenovo, Lenovo is predominantly a consumer brand. But if you look at the telcos, telcos are again driven by huge consumption with the mobile operators. I mean, if you just look at the size and scale of the mobile operators in China, Compare that with any other market. I mean, it's just a different world altogether.
And it's so much better than the U.S. I mean, my phone never dropped out in China.
Oh wow!
Even
And you
on
say
top of
that
a
as
mountain.
a bona fide American passport holder. So
Oh
you
my
can,
God! I mean, Verizon and Sprint and those guys. I could be in my driveway, and the phone drops. I had a China Mobile box Nokia in 2006. I was on top of a mountain, randomly in the middle of nowhere in China, and my phone worked. I'm like, okay, China wins.
So, okay, let me finish on this question. I want to ask you both. I want you to nail your colours to the mast a little bit here. Yeah. So, and you're qualified to speak on these terms. Is that we've spoken a lot tonight about branding and sales, and we talk about innovation and different markets and so on. And entrepreneurship was the last question asked by Ken Lee. Is at what point will we be? In what point in time? This is forecasting again. Yeah. So, okay, let's do it. What point in time is it? Sort of 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Never. That we'll be in a situation where, China potentially, or Asia specifically, will produce the kind of people, like the Steve Jobs of this world, and will be seen as ground zero of innovation in that sense. That people say, look, if you want to get in the act, you've got to go to Shenzhen or Shanghai, or, how far are we away from that? Because until now, Silicon Valley still has that. You mentioned rightly, it's still the home of innovation, right? It's that, at what point will that switch, if ever? Will America still be 100 years from now? Because I've had interesting conversations about this. If you go back to the late 19th century and General Electric and, Edison and stuff like that, this was all emerging back then. It was still very much in the old world that, okay, look, these are these classless Yanks doing this stuff over here. They don't know what they're doing. And then suddenly, bam, we have the US in the 30s and 40s and so on. Yeah. Predict. Can we forecast? Are we allowed? How long are we away from that?
I'm going to challenge the premise, so feel free to go.
Look, I think the tide's turning. I think it's only a matter of time, Graham. I think it's hard to... I shouldn't put my foot in my mouth and put a number to it, but I think if you look at what's going on in China, and I'm only saying that from what I'm observing. We talked about Steve Jobs. I mean, I hear all sorts of stuff about him. I have a lot of respect for him. I have a lot of respect for someone who can do something so innovative and in such a simplistic manner. And I know he was very driven, and but the reality is, you look at Jack Ma. I mean, he's there. I mean, we're just not. I think it's part of our ability to acknowledge that, and we're not. And I don't think it's the West versus the East. I think it's China versus the rest of the world. And I think China. I'm only speaking from a technology standpoint. I think China is the tip of the iceberg. What we see is the tip of the iceberg. I actually think there's so much innovation going on in there. They've got so much capital, right? They've got the ability to build everything from the ground up themselves. They can grind the bloody sand and make semicon chips out of it, right? I don't know if that's how you build semicon chips, but I just took a stab at it. But the reality is, they are doing it. And what I've realized with some of this, what you've seen with Alibaba, I mean, they've just been coming up with these announcements over the last few months. And by the way, if you haven't, you should see this great coverage for our analyst Tim Sheedy, who's been covered on this great Alibaba and Intel partnership. But what I've observed with China is they don't make noise before they get it right. They get it right, they get it up. They want to make sure they get themselves to a point where they believe they're world beating. And that's when they start to make noise, right? I think there's a huge difference there. The hype goes away, right? To me, it's very clinical. I think if you're seeing some innovation in China, I can bet there's a lot more underneath there that you're not even seeing. And they've got tons of money. I think the only thing that could hold China back is the entire digital economy is based on data and transfer of data between whether it's different businesses, different economies, different governments, different bodies. And that at the moment is a question mark with how comfortable the rest of the world is with data, transgressing into China. And for China, how comfortable are they with their data stepping out? And I think that's going to hold them back. I think otherwise they've got it pretty well nutted out. And they're starting to put out good shows as well, as you see with Alibaba.
Absolutely.
Well,
challenge it.
yeah. Well,
Go
I
for
just
it.
think that everything's going to be changed. I mean, I think that the idea of China producing the next Steve Jobs. I mean, I was going to use Jack Ma as an example as well. But Jack Ma's educated in the U.S., lived overseas. I mean, how many flags are in this room?
Yeah,
Right. And we're in
Yep.
Singapore.
Yeah.
Right. Think about that. So I think how many people in Silicon Valley who started a business that got successful were born and raised in Silicon Valley?
That's a great point.
Next
Big
to
percentage.
none of them, right?
Yeah.
So our perspective is this U.S., UK, China thing, but really the next Steve Jobs could come out of anywhere. It's just where are they going to outlet through? And they could they could be produced in China just as fast as they could be produced in Silicon Valley just as fast as Moscow, wherever, right? But I think that our outlook on how the world is turning also needs to look at just how we're changing.
Yeah.
I mean, we can exist now in a far more global sphere easier than even 10 years ago, right? And that's not that long ago. I mean, we still had, what, 2G back then 10 years ago, right? But even so, we're far more global even now than then. So I think that since the world's getting even smaller, the idea of tech giants coming out of a particular nationality or like a certain persona, that's going to fade.
Yeah.
That's going to fade, and it's just going to be about good products. It's just going to be like Razer. Could be from Singapore. People think it's from California. You know?
Yeah, no, look, I couldn't agree more. I completely agree with what you've said. I think there are two things here, right? One is an environment that's conducive to creating that sort of innovation and scale, and I think China's got that. I think as far as people are concerned, I think we're in a global world, right? I mean, if someone, and you know, we're all aspiring, I'm aspiring, our business is going to be really big, and at some point, if someone asked me, you know, it's the discussion we were having earlier, right? Where are you from? Or the roots of my company. The roots of my company, first of all, shouldn't be tied to me, right? I am, even as a founder, I'm an employee of the company, right? You build a legacy based on bringing the right people on board who take the legacy forward, right? So first of all, it shouldn't be tied to my origin. But with as mixed up as I am, I mean, if someone asked me today at this point of time, what is, if they had to tie it to a nationality and ethnicity, I would say, you know, we are a Kiwi-owned Singapore company with Indian origins, right? I mean, that's how I look at it. And
So it is.
Yeah, that's how it is. And I think that's where the world is going. And, you know, it's like our kids, right? I mean, my kids they were 2 years old when we moved from New Zealand. And, you know, I've got twin boys and they're in Singapore for the last 10 years. And, you know, I mean, they live that life as three different identities that come together beautifully.
Yeah, they are the future.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, what a great conversation.
Well, thank you.
This
Thank
is
you, gentlemen.
awesome. Thanks for
Really
having
enjoyed
me.
that. Graham Brown, Amit Gupta,
Thank
William
you, Graham.
Gilchrist. Really enjoyed our chat tonight. And if you enjoyed as well, if you are watching at home, if people do that these days, then please like us on Facebook. Hit the like button in the face. You can subscribe to the Age Tech Podcast channel as well if you want to catch these lives when they go out. If you're listening on iTunes, and please rate us on iTunes. Subscribe to us on iTunes if you want to get updates regularly. We are on asiamatters.show. We'll broadcast all our lives if you want to get the link as well at asiamatters.show/live. We'll be back on LinkedIn and all the usual social channels as well. And we'll be interested to hear your comments and feedback as well. So we'll post this out on LinkedIn. If you have any comments and feedback on what we talked about this evening, we'd love to hear it. And if you want to contribute like Ken did tonight to the content, we'd love to hear the stories that you find interesting. The best way to do that is to hashtag Asia Matters, or you can tag me, CC, whatever it's called on LinkedIn, my name, or atp.show as well will get us as well. So we will pick that up, and the best ones we'll shout out on the show. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank my guests, William and Amit, for doing such a great job tonight, and also our engineer, Bharat, in the background, the unsung hero of the show. And with that, we'll be signing off. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks a lot.